The grand halls of the Cell-Eri royal palace were filled with whispers. The announcement had spread across the empire like wildfire. The mighty King Vornak, ruler of the Cell-Eri, had declared something unheard of. His daughters, the royal princesses, were to marry a human. On Earth, Nathan Carter, a former space explorer, had no idea that his life was about to change forever. He was just returning home after a long day, sipping on a cold drink, when a bright light appeared in the sky. Before he could react, a beam of energy surrounded him, and suddenly, everything turned black. Nathan woke up in a strange room. The walls glowed with a soft blue light, and the air smelled different, almost metallic. He sat up quickly, his head spinning. His heart pounded as he realized he was not on Earth anymore. A deep voice echoed through the room. "You are in the royal palace of Cell-Eri Prime." Nathan turned to see a tall alien figure. His skin was a shade of deep purple, his eyes glowing like stars. He wore elegant golden armor and held a staff that crackled with energy. "Who are you?" Nathan demanded, his voice rough with confusion. "I am General Kalos, commander of the King's Guard," the alien replied. "You have been chosen by King Vornak himself." "Chosen?" Nathan narrowed his eyes. "For what?" General Kalos hesitated, then spoke. "You are to marry the king's daughters." Nathan blinked. He thought he misheard. "Wait, what?" Kalos remained serious. "The king's decree is final. You are to wed Princess Soraya and Princess Vela in order to strengthen relations between the Cell-Eri Empire and humanity." Nathan let out a sharp laugh, thinking this was some kind of joke. But Kalos didn't flinch. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. This was real. Before Nathan could protest, the doors swung open and a massive figure entered the room. King Vornak was even taller than Kalos, his golden robes flowing behind him. His deep, commanding voice echoed through the chamber. "Human, you have been chosen." His piercing gaze met Nathan's. "My daughters will be your brides." Nathan's mind raced. He had fought pirates in deep space, survived alien storms, and even seen the wonders of the galaxy. But this was insanity. "I don't agree to this," Nathan said firmly. King Vornak's expression darkened. "You do not have a choice." The weight of the words sank into Nathan. He looked around, realizing he was surrounded by guards. There was no escape. And then, the doors opened again. Two figures stepped forward. Princess Soraya, fierce and proud, with piercing emerald eyes. Princess Vela, calm and mysterious, with silver hair flowing like silk. Both stared at Nathan with unreadable expressions. The royal decree was set. Nathan Carter was now a future prince of an alien empire. Nathan stared at the two princesses standing before him. The shock from the king's decree hadn't worn off yet. Princess Soraya's eyes were cold, filled with an unreadable fire, while Princess Vela stood with a calm demeanor, as if this was all just a formality. Nathan swallowed hard. "This is insane," he muttered to himself. "I didn't sign up for any of this." He looked at King Vornak, who was watching him carefully. "You don't have to agree to it," the king said, his voice as firm as stone. "But you will follow the decree, or the consequences will be severe." Nathan's mind raced. This couldn't be real. A human being forced to marry two alien princesses in a far-off galaxy. It was too much to process. Princess Soraya stepped forward, her eyes studying Nathan. "You don't look like much," she said, her voice sharp. "But it seems my father believes you have something special, or perhaps he just wants to see what happens when he mixes our blood with yours." Nathan clenched his fists. "I'm not here to entertain anyone," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "And I'm definitely not here to be some political pawn." Soraya's lips curled into a smirk. "That's exactly what you are," she replied coolly. "A pawn in our father's game of power. A human who will unite our worlds." Vela, standing silently by her sister's side, finally spoke. Her voice was softer, gentler. "Soraya, let him be. He's confused." Then she turned to Nathan, her silver hair glistening. "You'll have time to adjust. We'll have to prepare for the ceremony soon." Nathan looked at her, his frustration building. "Prepare for what? I don't want to marry either of you." Vela's gaze softened, though there was no sign of amusement on her face. "Neither of us wants this," she said, her tone a little more empathetic. "But our father's command is not one to be ignored. It's a choice that has already been made. For us. For you. For both of our people." Nathan shook his head, still trying to wrap his mind around the situation. He had been dragged across the stars against his will, and now he was trapped in a royal palace with two alien women he barely knew, being forced into a marriage he didn't want. The tension was thick in the room, and Nathan could feel the weight of their stares on him. The princesses were clearly powerful, used to being in control, and this must have been as hard for them as it was for him. But there was no escaping it. "Let's get one thing straight," Nathan said, meeting the eyes of both princesses. "I'm not here to be your puppet. I'll play along, but don't think I'm doing it for you. I'm doing it for myself, for Earth." Soraya and Vela exchanged a glance, their expressions unreadable. But before either of them could respond, King Vornek's voice echoed through the room again. "It is settled then. We begin preparations. The wedding will take place soon." Nathan didn't know how to feel. He was caught in the middle of a situation he couldn't escape, but one thing was clear. Nothing about this was going to be easy. The news of Nathan's arrival spread like wildfire throughout the Celery Empire. The royal court was in an uproar, with heated discussions echoing through the grand palace halls. The king's decision to marry his daughters to a human had shocked everyone, and not in a good way. The nobles, the warriors, and even the advisors all had strong opinions on the matter. Most of them were furious. In the center of the grand court, a large group of nobles gathered, their voices filled with anger and disbelief. Lord Varric, a powerful Celery noble with dark, red-tinted skin, paced back and forth, his large hands clenched into fists. "A human, a mere human," he shouted. "This is an insult to the Celery bloodline. How could King Vornak agree to this? This marriage is nothing more than a humiliation." The other nobles murmured in agreement, some nodding furiously, while others shook their heads in disbelief. They had long held the belief that the Celery were superior, their bloodline pure and unblemished. Marrying the human, someone they saw as weak and insignificant, felt like a betrayal to their ancient traditions. Lord Varric's voice grew louder. "I demand that the king reconsider. The human has no place in our court, no place in our bloodline. I will not stand by while this travesty unfolds." But his words were met with silence as the chamber door opened. The royal advisor, an ancient and wise figure named Elira, stepped forward. She was older than most of the nobles, her skin a pale shade of blue, and her long silver hair flowed around her like a halo. Though her appearance was gentle, her presence carried a weight of authority that silenced the room. "I understand your anger, Lord Varric," Elira said in a calm, measured tone. "But the king's decision is final. We are not to question it." "But advisor Elira, this human," Varric began, only to be interrupted. "The king has made his choice," Elira repeated, her voice firm. "It is not for us to question. We must accept it for the greater good of the empire." There was a long pause. The nobles exchanged uneasy glances, but they knew better than to challenge Elira directly. She had been the king's advisor for centuries, and was known for her wisdom. Meanwhile, Nathan stood outside the chamber, overhearing the angry voices. He couldn't make out the exact words, but the tone was unmistakable. They hated him. The nobles wanted nothing to do with him. He felt a chill run down his spine. The tension was so thick, it was almost suffocating. His future, his life, had become a political chess piece, and he was just waiting for the next move. He had thought that his troubles were over when he was whisked away from Earth, But it seemed the real battle was only just beginning. He was stuck in the middle of a power struggle between a furious royal court and a king who saw him as nothing more than a tool for his empire's survival. Nathan looked at the ornate doors of the royal chamber, feeling the weight of the stares from the nobles who had no intention of accepting him. He knew that he had no choice but to play along. For now. But he also knew that this wouldn't be easy, and the road ahead was filled with uncertainty. As the doors closed behind him, Nathan made a silent promise to himself. He would survive this, no matter what it took. The days following Nathan's arrival at the royal palace were filled with tension. The king's decree had stirred the galaxy into chaos, and it wasn't long before the whispers turned into a direct challenge. To prove his worth, Nathan was told he would have to undergo 3 royal trials, a series of dangerous tests that would decide whether he was fit to marry the princesses and take his place among the Celery elite. Nathan didn't understand why he had to go through these trials. He had never asked for any of this. But the king had made it clear, survive the trials or leave. There was no middle ground. Nathan had no choice but to face the challenge head-on. The first trial took place in the Pit of Vervin, a massive arena deep within the palace. The walls were lined with warriors, nobles, and court members eager to watch the spectacle. The ground was a dusty, blood-stained dirt floor, and the air was thick with anticipation. Nathan stood in the center of the arena, his heart pounding in his chest. His opponents were not human. They were Celery warriors, each taller and stronger than he was. Some wielded glowing energy swords, while others held jagged blades made from the bones of ancient beasts. "You're outmatched, human," one of the warriors sneered, his voice deep and mocking. He cracked his knuckles, clearly expecting an easy victory. But Nathan wasn't here to lose. He had fought in space battles, survived alien storms, and faced death countless times. But this was different. He had no weapons, only his wits. Nathan's eyes scanned the arena, searching for any advantage. The warriors were big and slow, their strength impressive, but their movements predictable. Nathan's strength was in his mind, in his ability to think on his feet. As the signal to begin echoed through the arena, Nathan dove to the side, narrowly dodging the first swing of a warrior's blade. He scrambled to his feet and sprinted toward a pile of debris. His hands grabbed a large, jagged piece of metal, just large enough to use as a makeshift shield. The warriors charged at him, laughing. They didn't think he stood a chance. But Nathan wasn't just a soldier. He was a survivor. As the first warrior lunged, Nathan sidestepped, swinging the metal shard at his opponent's legs. The warrior fell to the ground with a roar, and Nathan immediately took the opportunity to disarm him, using the warrior's own weapon against him. The crowd gasped in shock. Nathan had already taken down one of the warriors. The remaining 2 warriors hesitated. They hadn't expected this human to be so resourceful. Nathan didn't give them a chance to rethink their strategy. He charged, using the fallen warrior's weapon to strike quickly and decisively. With a swift move, he disarmed the second opponent, leaving only one remaining. Breathing heavily, Nathan faced the final warrior. This one was bigger, stronger, and faster. But Nathan had already proven he could hold his own. With a fierce cry, he threw himself into the fight. The battle was fierce, but in the end, Nathan's strategy won out. He managed to outsmart the last warrior, knocking him to the ground. The crowd erupted into applause, and the warriors bowed to Nathan, acknowledging his victory. As he stood victorious in the arena, Nathan felt a mix of relief and pride. He had completed the first trial, but there were still 2 more to go. He knew this was just the beginning. The king's voice rang out from the royal box. "Well done, human," he called. But the real test is yet to come. The crowds in the royal palace were still buzzing with excitement over Nathan's victory in the Pit of Vervin. Whispers filled the air, some of admiration, others of disbelief. A human had defeated powerful Celery warriors, a feat that no one had expected. But as Nathan left the arena, he knew this was only the beginning. 2 more trials awaited him, trials that would push him to his limits. The second trial was known as the Trial of the Mind. It would take place in the Temple of Tyron, a towering structure filled with ancient puzzles and traps designed to test intelligence and resourcefulness. Nathan had heard whispers that no one, not even the most brilliant minds of the HFY, had ever completed it without difficulty. He entered the temple alone, the stone walls cold and unwelcoming. The air inside was thick with the scent of old books and forgotten secrets. The first challenge was simple enough. A door, but it was sealed by a complex set of locks. Nathan ran his fingers over the intricate mechanisms. He wasn't a master of alien technology, but his training as a space explorer had taught him how to adapt quickly. His mind raced as he thought through every possibility. The locks weren't mechanical. They were energy-based, something he had dealt with before in his travels. After a few moments of concentration, Nathan activated a small device he carried with him, a multi-tool he had designed to help with various technical issues. The door clicked open, and Nathan smiled to himself. But that was just the first test. Inside, the chamber was vast and filled with floating platforms and glowing symbols. The puzzle was clear. Nathan had to use the platforms to reach a high pedestal, where an artifact lay. The problem was, the platforms moved constantly, some disappearing and reappearing at random intervals. Nathan stepped forward, carefully choosing his path. The platforms moved quickly, and Nathan had to leap from one to the next, timing each jump perfectly. His heart raced as he made it to the final platform, just a few feet away from the pedestal. But the platform beneath him began to crumble. Without thinking, he leaped, reaching out for the artifact. His fingers brushed against the cold stone, and with one final push, he grabbed the artifact. The room suddenly went silent. The platform stopped moving, and the glowing symbols on the walls dimmed. Nathan had passed the second trial. Outside the temple, a crowd had gathered to watch. The nobles and warriors stood in shock, eyes wide with disbelief. Nathan had done it again. He had outsmarted and outlasted the most difficult challenges that HFY had thrown at him. Soraya and Vela, standing beside their father, exchanged a glance. Both had been watching the trials closely, and both were surprised by Nathan's skill. For the first time, they began to see him in a different light, not just a human to marry, but someone who was proving himself worthy of their respect. King Vornak, standing high above the crowd, looked down at Nathan with a deep, calculating gaze. "Well done, human," he said, his voice loud enough for all to hear. "But remember, the final trial will test more than just your strength and intelligence. It will test your heart." Nathan, breathing heavily but determined, nodded. He knew that the hardest challenge was still ahead. But one thing was certain. He was no longer just a pawn in a royal game. He had earned his place, and he wasn't going to stop now. Nathan had barely recovered from the shock of completing the second trial when the royal palace was plunged into chaos. The sounds of alarms echoed through the marble halls, and the air felt tense, thick with fear. The HFY Empire, despite its advanced technology and immense power, had one weakness that no one could ignore: its enemies. As the king's third trial for Nathan loomed, an unexpected threat emerged. It was clear to anyone watching that Nathan had become more than just a symbol for the HFY. He was a threat to many who did not believe in the king's decree. And now, there were those who wanted to see him dead. It started with a faint noise, almost imperceptible, but Nathan's instincts kicked in. He had been through enough in his life to know when something was wrong. The hair on the back of his neck stood up, and his eyes darted around the royal courtyard, searching for any sign of danger. It was then that the first arrow flew from the shadows. Nathan ducked instinctively, narrowly avoiding the poison-tipped projectile that hissed through the air just inches from his face. The guards surrounding him were quick to react, drawing their energy weapons, but the assassin was already gone, hidden deep within the palace walls. "Nathan," a voice called from behind him. It was Soraya, her face tense with worry as she stepped forward, her eyes scanning the area. "You need to get inside. Now." Nathan didn't need any more encouragement. As he sprinted towards the safety of the palace, he felt his heart race, not just from the physical exertion, but from the realization that someone had tried to kill him. The royal guards formed a tight circle around him, their weapons drawn as they ushered him toward the king's private chambers. As they passed through the grand hallway, the palace seemed eerily quiet. The usual sounds of music, laughter, and conversation were replaced by tense whispers and hurried footsteps. Once inside the king's chamber, the doors slammed shut behind them, and the heavy sounds of metal bolts locking into place echoed through the room. King Vornak stood by the window, his eyes narrowed in thought, as he looked out over the sprawling city. "This is no accident," the king muttered, his voice filled with anger. "The attempt on your life was planned. The question is, who is behind it?" Nathan couldn't help but feel a surge of frustration. He had just completed the hardest trials, survived against impossible odds, and now someone was trying to end his life before he could even complete the final challenge. But Nathan wasn't about to back down. "I didn't come here to be a target," Nathan said firmly. "I came to prove myself, and I'm not going to let anyone stop me now." Soraya stepped forward, her sharp eyes locking with Nathan's. "You're right. Whoever is behind this won't stop until they see you fall." She looked at her father. "We need to find them before they try again." Vela, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. "We're not just dealing with enemies from within the court. There are factions outside the palace who want to destroy our family. But whoever it is, we must act quickly." The king's gaze was cold, his mind already working through strategies. "We will find them. And when we do, they will pay." Nathan felt a cold shiver down his spine. His heart raced not just from the danger, but from the weight of the situation. He had earned his place in the trials, but now it seemed his greatest challenge wouldn't come from the king's tests. It would come from those who wished him dead, and he would need to stay one step ahead if he was to survive. The tension in the room was thick. Nathan, Soraya, and Vela exchanged glances, all of them now fully aware that the game had changed. The final trial awaited him, but now he had to survive long enough to face it. The tension in the royal palace had never been higher. After the assassination attempt, Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that someone was always watching him. The walls of the palace, once beautiful and majestic, now felt like a trap, closing in on him. He knew the enemy was out there, and they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted: his death. The king's chambers were filled with strategists and guards, each more determined than the last to protect Nathan. But Nathan wasn't so sure they could keep him safe. The attack had been swift, clean, and calculated. The assassin had known exactly where to strike. Nathan was no longer just a pawn in a royal game. He was a target, and the palace itself felt like a gilded cage. That night, as he paced the floor of his quarters, Nathan's mind raced. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing on him. He had two options: stay and face the final trial, or escape before it was too late. The king's trials had been nothing but a path to this. His survival was no longer guaranteed. His thoughts were interrupted by a quiet knock at the door. Nathan turned quickly, his pulse quickening, but it was only Vela standing there, her face unreadable. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. Nathan nodded and stepped aside. Vela entered the room, her silver hair glowing faintly in the dim light. Her calm demeanor was a stark contrast to the chaos outside. She looked at him with concern but said nothing at first. "You've been quiet lately," Nathan said, noticing the change in her usual calmness. "Is everything okay?" Vela hesitated for a moment before speaking. "We need to talk, Nathan," she said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't trust the king's guards to keep you safe anymore." Nathan's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" She glanced around the room to make sure no one was listening. "I know the attack wasn't just some random attempt. It was planned, and I believe it came from someone close to the throne." Nathan frowned. his mind racing. You mean someone inside the palace? Vela nodded. The king's decree has upset a lot of powerful people. Some of them will do anything to stop this marriage from happening. If you stay here, the danger will only grow. They'll try again, and next time, they might succeed. Nathan's heart skipped a beat. He had known this was coming. He could feel it. So what are you saying? Vela's eyes locked with his. I'm offering you a chance to leave the palace, Nathan. Escape while you still can. It's the only way you'll survive. For a long moment, Nathan was silent. The weight of her words hung heavily in the air. He had come to that Cellary world for a purpose, to prove himself, to face the trials, and to honor the king's decree. But now, it seemed his survival depended on running, on abandoning the very reason he had come here. Could he leave it all behind? But deep down, Nathan knew there was no choice. He couldn't stay and risk death. He needed to get away, to find a way out of this mess before it was too late. I'll do it, he said finally, his voice steady. But we need to move fast. Vela nodded, her expression serious. I'll help you. We'll leave tonight. If we're caught, there's no telling what will happen. The plan was set. Nathan was about to leave the palace that had become his prison. But he knew one thing for certain. No matter where he went, he would have to be ready for anything. The true fight for his life was only just beginning. That night, the moon hung high in the sky over the Cellary capital. It was a calm, quiet night. Too quiet for Nathan's liking. As he followed Vela through the darkened halls of the palace, his heart raced with every step. The plan was simple: slip past the guards, find the hidden passage, and escape. But simple plans were often the most dangerous. The walls of the palace, lined with towering columns and grand arches, seemed to close in around Nathan as he moved silently through the corridors. Vela led the way, her silver hair barely visible in the shadows. She glanced back at Nathan every few steps, her eyes filled with a mix of concern and determination. You know what you're doing, right? Nathan whispered, keeping his voice low as they moved quickly. Vela nodded without speaking, her steps light as she guided him through the maze of hallways. She had been part of the palace for longer than Nathan had, and she knew its secrets. She knew the places where the guards wouldn't be, the hidden passages that led to safety. But even with all her knowledge, this was a risk. One wrong move, and they would be caught. As they approached the royal gardens, the area near the edge of the palace, Nathan's mind raced. This wasn't just a palace. This was a fortress, surrounded by Cellary soldiers, royal guards, and hundreds of spies. The moment they stepped outside, they'd be vulnerable. Vela motioned for Nathan to follow her to the garden's back entrance, where an ancient stone archway led to a narrow passage beneath the palace grounds. Just as they reached it, the sound of footsteps echoed in the distance. Nathan's heart stopped. They were too close to the exit, but the guards were nearby. Quick, Vela hissed, pulling Nathan toward the entrance. She pushed him through first, before sliding in behind him. The passage was narrow, dark, and cold, but it was their only way out. They moved quickly, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the thick stone walls. But then, the unmistakable sound of a door creaking open reached their ears. Nathan froze. He didn't know if they'd been spotted yet, or if it was just a guard passing by, but the feeling of danger was growing stronger by the second. Vela's eyes met his in the dim light. We need to move faster. Just as they turned the corner, the quiet was broken by a loud bang, followed by shouting. Nathan's pulse quickened. The guards had found the hidden passage. They had no time to waste. They couldn't let themselves get trapped in here. Vela led the way as they raced through the passage, their breaths coming in fast gasps. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet began to shake. Nathan stumbled, nearly losing his balance. Vela grabbed his arm to steady him. "It's the explosion," she whispered, a hint of panic in her voice. "They've set a trap. We've been found." The walls of the passage cracked, and Nathan's stomach twisted. Whoever was behind, this wasn't just trying to stop him. They were trying to eliminate him completely. The explosion had been designed to trap him, to make sure he couldn't escape. They ran faster, their destination unclear, but the only thing on Nathan's mind was survival. He had come this far, endured the trials, and fought his way through. But now, the greatest threat of all was here. The king's decree had been a challenge, but this was a fight for his life. And whoever was behind the attack, Nathan knew they would stop at nothing to see him fail. Nathan's heart pounded in his chest as he and Vela sprinted through the dark, crumbling passage beneath the palace. The explosion behind them had caused the walls to shake, and the distant sound of heavy footsteps echoed closer. They could feel the heat from the blast creeping along the stone corridors, a constant reminder that danger was at their heels. The passage ahead was narrow, and Nathan had to duck his head to avoid hitting the low ceiling. His mind raced, trying to process everything that had happened. The assassination attempt, the hidden threats inside the palace, and now the explosion. Someone wanted him dead, and they were using everything they had to make sure it happened. "Vela, we need to hurry," Nathan gasped, his breath coming in short, panicked bursts. Vela's face was set in determination, her silver hair sticking to her face as she pushed forward. "We're almost there. The exit is just ahead." Nathan couldn't tell if she was lying to make him feel better, or if she truly believed they were close. He didn't have time to ask. They were running out of time. The passage behind them was collapsing, and the only thing they could do was keep moving forward. Suddenly, the floor beneath them gave a loud crack. Nathan's foot slipped, and he nearly lost his balance. Vela grabbed his arm, pulling him forward just as a section of the wall collapsed behind them. The noise was deafening, and the dust from the explosion filled the air, making it hard to see. "We need to get out of here now," Nathan shouted, panic rising in his chest. Vela's eyes widened as she scanned the crumbling passage. "This way." She pulled him to the side, where a small opening in the stone wall barely allowed them to squeeze through. Nathan pushed himself through the narrow gap, feeling the sharp edges of the rocks scrape his arms as he crawled into the darkness beyond. On the other side of the opening, the ground was soft, and Nathan felt the cool air hit his face as he stood up. They had made it to the outside, but the danger wasn't over yet. The sky above was a deep, ink-black shade, and the sounds of the explosion were still echoing in the distance. They were far from safe. As they moved toward the edge of the palace grounds, Nathan couldn't help but look back. The royal palace, a symbol of power and strength, was now a crumbling fortress, with enemies lurking in every shadow. The HFY Empire had been thrown into chaos, and Nathan was right in the center of it all. "Do you think they'll come after us?" Nathan asked, his voice tense. Vela looked around, her silver eyes sharp as she scanned the area. "Yes," she said quietly. "They'll send everything after us. They can't afford to let us escape." Nathan felt a chill run down his spine. He had thought the worst was behind him, that the trials and the palace's dangers were the hardest part. But now it seemed that his real challenge was only beginning. They had no time to waste. The palace was in chaos, and Nathan could sense that whoever had planned the attack was closing in fast. His only choice was to keep moving, to keep fighting for his life. The sound of footsteps grew louder, and Vela stopped, pulling Nathan behind a large rock. They waited, hearts pounding, as soldiers passed by, unaware of their presence. "We're not safe yet," Vela whispered, her voice urgent. "But we'll find a way." Nathan nodded, his mind racing. This wasn't the escape he had imagined. The stakes were higher than ever. But if there was one thing Nathan had learned from his time in the HFY Empire, it was this: humans had a way of surviving against all odds. And Nathan was determined to prove that, no matter what. The world outside the palace was dark and silent, but Nathan could feel the weight of the chase. The air was thick with the scent of dust and smoke from the explosion, and every step felt like a countdown to the inevitable. He and Vela had escaped the palace's crumbling walls, but now they were vulnerable, exposed in the open fields that stretched beyond the city. There was no shelter here, no place to hide. Vela led the way, her movements swift and graceful, but even she couldn't mask the worry in her eyes. Nathan's heart was still racing, his mind filled with questions he couldn't answer. Who was behind the attack? What did they want? And most importantly, would they survive long enough to find out? As they moved quickly, the sound of footsteps in the distance kept Nathan on edge. The royal guards were closing in. They had to get farther away faster. Vela, Nathan said, his voice low but urgent, we need to find somewhere to hide. They'll be on us in no time. Vela glanced around, her sharp eyes scanning the terrain. There's a forest up ahead. We can lose them there, but we need to move now. Without another word, they both broke into a run, heading for the cover of the trees. The forest was dense, filled with towering trees and thick underbrush. It was their only hope to escape the search party. Nathan felt his breath grow heavy, his legs burning with the effort. But he didn't stop. The forest swallowed them whole, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the thick canopy overhead. The darkness was both comforting and frightening. It shielded them from view, but it also made it harder to see their enemies. Every rustle in the leaves, every snapping twig made Nathan's heart jump. Hours passed, and the tension never lifted. They couldn't afford to rest. The guards would be relentless. The assassination attempt had been just the beginning. Whoever was behind it wouldn't stop until they had captured him, and probably killed him. Finally, they came to a clearing, and Vela stopped, her breath coming in sharp gasps. Nathan did the same, his mind still racing. We can't stay here, he said, his voice strained. They'll track us. We don't have a choice, Vela replied, her voice tight. We need to regroup, figure out our next move. Just then, the sound of a familiar voice reached them. It was deep, commanding, and unmistakable. Nathan. King Vornek's voice boomed through the trees. You're not alone. Nathan froze. The king had found them, but instead of the usual royal guards, the voice seemed calm, almost welcoming. Nathan turned to see the king emerge from the shadows, standing tall and imposing as ever. You? Nathan began, confused. I thought you were against me. Vela looked equally surprised, her face a mix of shock and disbelief. The king's sudden appearance seemed almost impossible. I was never against you, Nathan, King Vornek said, his tone surprisingly soft. I knew you had the strength, the courage to survive. That's why I chose you. You proved yourself, and now I need you by my side. Nathan's eyes widened. You were testing me, he asked, incredulous. Not just testing, the king replied, his expression serious. I needed to know if you were ready to stand with us, against the true threat to our people. The king's eyes darkened as he spoke. You're not just my son-in-law. You're now a part of this empire. And the enemies who tried to kill you, they will soon learn what happens when they cross us. Nathan took a step back, processing the words. The king's intentions had never been fully clear, but now Nathan realized something crucial. This was no longer just about a royal marriage or political alliances. This was a battle for the survival of an empire. Nathan took a deep breath and nodded. Then let's finish it. With the king's decree now fully understood, Nathan felt a shift inside himself. The game had changed. He was no longer just a pawn. He was part of something much larger. The final trial had come, and it wasn't just about surviving. It was about winning. And Nathan was ready.